Could you explain something for me on the back page, Section 3, not to be codified?
Yes, sir.
Implementation of this act is suspended until an appropriation for the implementation of this act is passed by 3/4 vote of both houses. If the appropriation for the implementation of this act is not passed by the 89th General Assembly, this act is void. Would you explain that to me in your own words, please?
Yes, sir. If I was trying to make what I believe to be an inaccurate argument for why we have to pass this legislation, I would play off a conspiracy theory that there perhaps could be a chance or attempt by the administration to implement this program without an appropriation. I don't think that's ever been their intent, but I think there was some concern that that was the case. And so by putting that language in the bill, it just ensures that nothing is implemented unless 3/4 of the legislature approves it. And that's really the law anyway in terms of appropriation, but it just firms that up. They can't implement it without an appropriation bill.
So we could pass the bill but not pass the appropriation and the bill die?
Yes, sir, and I hope we don't start taking odds on that, but I think that is absolutely an option.
Is the appropriation for this wrapped up into all the other areas of the agency that's housing this so that it's not split out separate?
I believe it's on the same appropriation bill. I think if we got to a point, I will tell you though, and that's a very good question, I think it's on the same appropriation bill, simply because DHS had said they had enough excess appropriation to fund without any additional appropriation since it's only half a fiscal year. But I can very much assure you that if the bill passes and the appropriation does not have 75 votes, we will amend out what is required to be amended out and pass the DHS appropriation. We will not, and I will not, even though I'm supporting it, I will not allow, the threats of shutting down an agency are old and overplayed, and that's not going to be the argument for why we have to pass an appropriation bill. If 75 people don't pass it, then we'll do what we need to do to take it out and pass the appropriation to continue to fund DHS as it exists today.
We have Representative Hammer. Director Seeley, would you like to speak to that question on the budget that Representative Hammer is asking about? If you can go to the end of the table and do that, please, to make sure that that's clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm the Director of DHS. I was just going to note it is part of the Medicaid appropriation. Each of our divisions is a separate appropriation, so it's not the entire agency, but it is part of the Division of Medical Services appropriation.
Well, can I ask Mr. Seeley a question?
Sure.
But under that umbrella, doesn't that cover like the nursing homes and what all is covered under that portion of the appropriation?
Yes,
budget?
sir. The entire Medicaid budget is in that appropriation.
Just to be straightforward, what I don't want to see happen is that if some of us, or if anybody chooses not to want to go along with the Medicaid expansion, we have to vote your whole budget down. All of a sudden, it's going to show up in the paper that we threw grandma back out on the street again for the second time this session and other issues. Am I incorrect in that interpretation that theoretically could happen if we have to vote against your appropriation because we don't like the expansion?
Well, I heard Representative Burris offer an option if that were to happen.
And you'd be okay with that option?
Which would be to take that out. Well, I don't have much to say about it. You all make those decisions.
I would reiterate, Representative Hammer, you've got a valid concern. I think it's just the way the procedure here has to work. But I mean, if I'm not going to put any of you in a corner and say either vote for expansion or we shut down Medicaid. That's a very immature argument, and it's not one that I'm going to make.
And did I understand that, and with Mr. Seeley, get the mic to affirm it in his own words, if that should happen, and maybe I misinterpreted what you said, that's why I want to ask the question, you have enough in your budget to be able to absorb the first half year's cost of this expansion, or did I misunderstand that?
We do, as the budget is currently written. What I understood Mr. Burris to be saying was, in effect, they would take that excess out. I mean, you all have the ability to keep us from being able to implement the first half by amending that bill.
I guess
we can't do it without you, without 75 votes, is my understanding.
I guess what I'm struggling with in my mind is, how did we let that much money get in your budget that you could afford to do it? Appropriation only. Okay. All right.
That's a good question. I'd be happy to hear the answer.
Well, I mean, it's a legitimate question. I think if you got enough money in the budget to do it, if we don't let it go, how did you have that much surplus money in your budget if this doesn't pass, is what I'm wondering.
I just know, Mr. Hammer, historically, I mean, it's about, I think, 10 or 15% of our Medicaid budget total. And we, as you know, things happen with Medicaid up or down. We can't spend it unless we have the funding. But there's always excess appropriation put in the Medicaid budget, so we don't have to come back, for example, for special sessions. But again, we can't spend it if we don't have the money. And you all appropriate the state money, and the federal government limits how much federal money we get.
Do you know how much dollar-wise we're talking about that's appropriated for you to spend if it was there?
I don't have the figure in my head, total appropriation, no, sir.
Okay.
And I think the answer, Representative Hammer, that it's just a little bit low. If this was for a full year, they would not have enough excess since it's only half a year with a slow ramp up where you're not going to have 100% enrollment starting in January. You know, it's a half a fiscal year, and it's as the program's rolling out, so it's not nearly the appropriation that would need to fund the program on a whole year is not nearly what it is during this appropriation cycle.
Okay, and not to belabor the point, but let me ask you, are we going to be able, is this a subject that we're going to be able to bring up in the fiscal session, or would it require a 2/3 vote of the body to bring Medicaid up for a discussion during the fiscal section? Because that will be our next opportunity to talk about it.
Well, I think any substantive legislation like the one we're debating would require a 2/3 vote. To change the appropriation, you could the joint budget committee, a majority can change that appropriation, and then it could, and then 3/4 of the membership has to vote on it.
So could our checks and, I'm just rambling on. Is it okay, Mr. Chair?
Sure, keep going.
Thank you. So is it part of a checks and balance system that if we come back in the fiscal session and we don't like what's happened because the facts develop after we make the motion to vote this through, that we could by appropriation choke this thing down and bring it back into reality, or it would be such a concern that 2/3 of the body would vote to take it up as a special item in the fiscal session?
I don't think the 2/3 vote would be a requirement. I just think one of the points that I've often made is that we have annual circuit breakers because we're back here voting on this appropriation. And so when asking about the questions of DHS implementing this program in the right way, I think Director Seelig would say that I and others have been incredibly direct with how we are the legislature's participation and input in it, and I think that they're receptive to that because we start pre-budget hearings not that long from now, and we've got the ability every year to have input through the appropriation process.
Right. And with all due respect, though, I want to make sure that as an individual legislator that's not had those direct contacts, and I appreciate the work you and everybody else because I just do, but I want to make sure as a legislator that there's a stopgap in there, and I would want to echo my concern now that come the fiscal session, that if this thing turns out not to be what has been presented to us by virtue of the fact that it is a moving picture and we really don't know all the parts, that we've got some authority to put the brakes on during the legislative session if we can get enough of the legislators to say we've got to bring it up on the table and talk about it.
3/4 of the legislature has to approve this every year. Representative Link is chairman of the Rules and Regs Subcommittee of ALC. Every rule and reg before it's promulgated has to come to ALC 30 days before. That's in the bill. That's a little bit of an enhancement in that process. And Representative Hammer, to you specifically, it's my recollection that you're chairing a pretty important interim committee. I have a feeling they'll return phone calls to you as well.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.